everybody, to This Week in Cannabis Live. We have some fresh faces and a lot of faces this way. Next to me is Ben Larson from High Spirits. Over on the other side, a new guest this week, sitting in for Jeremy, is Bryan Fields from The Dime. Oh, damn. Down here is Marc Hauser from Cannabis Musings. And further over is Anna Ray Grabstein, also from High Spirits. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
What's up, Jay?
Hello.
Morning.
Another week in cannabis here. Marc, I want to start with you because you, before we went live, had a bit of a concern, let's say, with what publicly traded companies say and their earnings reports, which we saw a lot of this week. I don't think we're going to go earnings by earnings, but on the whole, what is your beef? You want to talk about it?
You know what really grinds my gears is I've complained about this before, and it's that there is a tendency in this industry for press releases to sort of hide the ball with not creative accounting, because it's all, I'm not accusing anybody of lying, that is for sure, but just sort of using creative language to sort of on the headlines in order to sort of bury the actual truth as to performance, and that comes in the terms of limiting, the press, the statement being about continued operations or adjusted EBITDA and things like that. And, it's frustrating because people just read the headlines, but it goes beyond rather than getting into the discipline of learning how and understanding how to read the press release, but also read the financials and understand what is really happening here. It's important, not just an investor, this is not investment advice, but just generally to understand the health or the lack of health in this industry.
So it's not creative accounting, it's creative writing.
No. Again, this is not me suggesting that there's any sort of real, there is a little bit of wiggle room in what you adjust on EBITDA for adjusted EBITDA, but again, that's not a GAAP measure. So on the actual financial statements, these are audited financials. So
yeah. Well, with that caveat in mind, or that beat, go ahead.
Go for it. This has always been the case in the cannabis industry. When I first came in the cannabis industry, every press release every week from every, Canadian publicly traded company, I just remember coming out of the tech industry, I'm like, what is this? This isn't news. And it's just kind of evolved and persisted. And does anyone ever or really care anymore? I don't pay attention to this. I know I'm not a banker or that kind of stuff. Anna Ray, you pay a lot more attention to this.
I've stopped though, because there aren't retail investors investing in these companies. Generally, sure, the press release doesn't tell a great story, but the financial reports, when you read them, don't either. And the most interesting companies in cannabis are not being covered in earnings reports. They're private companies that are putting up really awesome results that we don't get to talk about unless you get the inside scoop. So that's what's much more interesting to me is the companies that aren't releasing earnings.
Why do they put them out then?
Well, why do private companies put out press releases?
No, why do the public companies put them out? Because I agree, Marc, right? It's not really saying anything. Do they feel like they have to put that out?
Well, they are required by law. There is, because a lot of even, the ones that are SEC filers, but also the ones that are, Canadian filers. They are required to put out quarterly reporting and then report it on an 8K. But yes, they're not. There's not a specific format that they're required to put in the press release in bold and italics in the headline.
But if they don't create the narrative, someone else will, and it will be truthful.
Right. No, I think this has been an ongoing issue in the cannabis industry for sure. And actually, I don't need to announce it now. We'll release it in our newsletter, but we actually have a partnership blossoming with the Canadian Securities Exchange, where some of these companies are traded and talk about this exact issue, but also focus on the companies that are publicly traded. Go ahead.
I just want to throw in one last thing is I think, for anybody from any of the companies that do this, this is all I think coming from, it's constructive criticism. Everybody on this call wants this industry to be better. We want it to do better. We want it to succeed. And in one of those ways is by doing, is by following the herd of how what do investors expect to be disclosed in a press release, and what do they expect from the way this stuff is reported?
I'd say that, like, the way that I try to use the earnings reports, or have historically, is to understand kind of also operating benchmarks across the industry. And because these companies have such different profiles, like you look at TrueLeaf and they put up a very high gross margin, often in the 60%. And that seems insanely high compared to a lot of the private companies that I see the inside of their financials that are not vertically integrated in Florida, who are still profitable. And so then you have to ask yourself, like, well, what is the difference between a healthy, profitable company that has a 25% or 35% gross margin and a company like TrueLeaf that puts up a 60% gross margin and is losing hundreds of millions of dollars? It's just very confusing of what's going on. And so it's helpful to understand these benchmarks more, to also poke holes in the narrative of how different all these markets are. Like, TrueLeaf is only able to put up a gross margin like that because they are cultivating, producing, manufacturing 100% of what they sell in Florida. And when you're in a situation like that, you're going to have a consolidated margin across the supply chain. Whereas if you are more focused in one area of the supply chain, there's just no way that you'll ever reach a margin above 50%. Yeah. And so just to be able to, like, understand what are these underlying benchmarks helps, I think, people to tell if their company is doing the right thing or not. But to compare on just something like gross margin, it's just also not enough. So I look at it as like a little bit of theater, a little bit of benchmarking, and a helpful way to understand all the differences between the portfolios that these companies have.
Perfect. Go ahead, Bryan.
Just so we're not picking on public companies purely. This goes for all companies in this cannabis space. The one thing that always triggers me is adjusted EBITDA. Like, yes. I just tell me the EBITDA. Like, I'll adjust things out when I evaluate it, because like I see adjusted on something and I'm like, they're hiding something, and I'm like, I start digging in, and indeed they're hiding. It's like those legal bills, you don't get to deduct those out because you have them every year.
Yeah.
I would love to see those press releases like slightly different, maybe taking a different approach of saying, okay, here's some of the investments we made from operational standpoint. Here's some of the tools that we're trying to separate ourselves. Here's some of the restructuring we're doing. Here's some of the AI stuff. Something that says, hey, we understand we're not doing great today, but we're making investments internally. And that's kind of like the story that they can tell. Instead of saying, hey, we lost money, we can say, hey, we invested money, and here's how we positioned it going forward.
Yeah. We actually had on MariMed this week, and they're pretty blunt that they moved out of Missouri for a whole variety of reasons. That they're and I know, Bryan, you've talked to Ryan Crandall about sort of how they build brand, and he was quite specific about how they do it, and they do have some leading brands, and I think they sort of lean into that. Can I move around to something else that is I've called it messy on this graphic, and it is messy because we actually had a bunch of news, or at least conversations, this past, I would say, 10 days. One about Florida not making the ballot, and I don't know if we talked about that last week. Another about the governor of Pennsylvania continues to say the same thing year after year about how he wants this, how people are moving. If you want legal cannabis in Pennsylvania, you're most likely to go to a surrounding state to get it, and more every day. New Hampshire, again, sort of broken record. The Senate in New Hampshire killed a legalization measure. So there's a lot happening. Generally, it has not been particularly positive. We haven't had a ton of positive news on new markets entering the fray. And Marc, we'll go to Marc first. Marc, is this like more of sort of a pushback, what you talked about last week? Like, there is more of a concerted, organized effort to push back on this? Or is each one of these things sort of its own sort of unique sort of situation?
I mean, to me, it's probably a little of both. There does seem to be a lot more noise overall about legalization, or from the anti-legalization folks, which has seemed to also be trending with just the way social issues are talked about in this, positioned in this country over the past 18 months or so. And so there's probably some sort of correlation there. But I think there is definitely, you really do have to look state by state. Yeah. But I think Anna Ray probably knows a lot more about this than I do.
As Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local, and there are very specific local reasons in Pennsylvania and New Hampshire and Florida while these things are not happening. but in aggregate, it doesn't equal great opening up of new markets, especially Florida and Pennsylvania, which would be big. NRA.
Can we rant on Pennsylvania though for a minute? So
Sure.
back to the last presidential run-up, and when Biden dropped out, there was a lot of discussion around Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania as a contender. And what is going on that someone that had presidential aspirations or was even considered cannot move something that he just needs to get the legislature on Pennsylvania on board for to move this forward? It's like, come on, man. This 4 years and you keep losing with this seemingly like pretty popular policy. So I'd like to see see Governor Shapiro really flex and show that he can be an actual leader here and get this across the board, because it's like enough already. It seems like it should be a done deal by now.
Yeah, there's a Republican state Senate, is my understanding, in Pennsylvania, which does make a big difference. But also, much to the benefit of New Jersey and New York and Delaware and Maryland, like it's a pretty good jam. And Ohio, it's good that Pennsylvania doesn't go legal, at least not soon. But I also think, and I want to out this if anybody wants to talk about it, that some of the big players, some of who we've named in Florida, I don't think mind staying a medical state only, because they do beaucoup business. Mark, you don't think that's true?
Well, I mean, Troy Bluth has dropped $200 million to get adult use on the ballot. So, I mean,
a bunch of real estate too. They have like a bunch of like 70 locations that are ready to be licensed or something like that.
Yeah,
but they can. Yes, but they also have I don't know 160, 150 something. I think, but they just opened their next dispensary in, I don't even know the place in Florida, but they have a pretty big footprint.
Haven't they also invested into like big infrastructure down there for the expansion of adult use? Right, there's anticipation of when this happens, but they had to put that capex in a while back. So for them, $200 million for what the market could be with adult use, it's worth the investment, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, she's also CEO Kim Rivers appears also close with the president of the United States. I mean, I think the whispers are that she's the one whispering in the president's ear from time to time from Mar-a-Lago about cannabis. Maybe, I don't know. NRA?
I'm just thinking about this from the bigger picture. Like, we're talking about like the trend with legalization or lack thereof, but zooming out even a little further, like this has actually been the year of the prohibitionist. Like this, we see, states trying to repeal their legal markets. I know here in California we have a bill that's trying to make the cannabis market more restrictive than it already is, and the general trend with like the Gallup polls are kind of receding. So it's not like very rosy right now. And we have this really big federal discussion that's going on. And I think that's the major focal point right now. It's like, we need federal clarity this year. Like we need something to happen with Schedule 3. We need clarity, whatever direction it is, with what hemp is going to do. And I think that just all needs to get figured out so we can actually refocus on the state level stuff. But
yeah, well, it's actually one of the markets that sort of is on the screen now. And we talked about, I think it was in today's newsletter, is Oklahoma, where the governor looks like wants to upend their medical market and hates cannabis. And probably the smell of it too. That's how that usually goes, right? It starts with the smell and goes to full prohibitionist mode. But this is one that I did want to bring up because it was in the news this week, and the governor there seems ready to sort of not license would-be operators, I think, is what it actually is. There are operators that need to get their facilities relicensed in some way, and the governor's telling them no. We have a comment. Oh, here you go. This is for you, Catherine Sidman. War against hemp. Yes. We need to make hemp great again. Is that right, Ben?
Well, so Oklahoma is an interesting state, right? Like, do you need a license to operate in Oklahoma? I don't even know, because it's been one of the wildest of West, states for a long time now. So if I'm a regulator or someone that's just somewhat anti-cannabis or hemp or whatever, I would want to repeal it too, because it's been a shit show there from a control perspective. So it's kind of it's a rough example. Like they didn't really do a good job.
Right.
They also made that bed, and so then they're pissed off as they're trying to lay in it. I mean, they rolled out their legal program with like basically anybody could go down and fill out a form and I think pay like $50 or $200 and get a license to cultivate. So there were 9,000 cultivators, and that's absurd. And it created like the new Emerald Triangle of illicit production for the entire United States, and yeah, it created some problems, but we could
I've driven
also
through Oklahoma. There's nothing emerald about it.
Wow.
yeah, it's like the dry yellow
Dry
what
yellow
is that?
triangle.
It's like the dry yellow triangle. So I mean, I think that there's an element that the industry needs to take responsibility for being highly irresponsible, and there's also a lot of responsibility that the regulators are. It's theirs.
Can we shift gears? This is me shifting gears for all you youngins out there. This is how I used to have to shift gears. I want to talk about price compression. We've talked about this a lot, I feel like, but there was actually some big data points this week that I think will underscore this. One, Michigan hit the $3 billion mark as a market in 2015. So big numbers. And there was some interesting numbers about border states and what's driving some of these sales, of course. Colorado hit an all-time low, $608 per pound, and Massachusetts grams are hovering around $4. So there's severe price compression in these markets. We already know about Michigan, but the other ones too. We actually have a webinar coming up next week about how to sort of combat this in the New York market if you are a brand or a retailer or both, or a producer. I don't, Anna Ray, you talked about this before. Like, this is not ideal from a market perspective. And I know, because we mentioned it before, what does it mean for premiumization of the product?
I'm sorry.
It's a lot wrapped into a question.
Well, I think that you're alluding to the fact that Ben and I participated in an event last night that Buddhist hosted that was about premiumization of cannabis, and I think that we both left slightly skeptical. And the reality,
very stoned.
Yes, and also very impressed with the quality of some incredibly premium products that are selling for incredibly cheap. And that was really the case in point, is that I think that cannabis has gotten very good and very high quality. And yet there is so much cannabis in the market, so much oversupply, that it's very challenging to create sort of any premium position from a price perspective, because there's just so much competition and we get in our own way. Producers, operators get in their own way and are driving the prices down to compete because there's no other differentiation really. So I think that this is challenging. I have some philosophies about ways to create alignment sort of across the supply chain, or in the way that we compensate salespeople and their commissions, that I think can make slight differences and improvements ultimately to get salespeople aligned more closely with incentives based on margins as opposed to top line revenue, so that they're aligned with a company's actual profitability. But that takes actually a lot of finesse financially, and a lot of startup cannabis companies aren't prepared to implement something like that.
Yeah, Bryan, you talk to a lot of folks. What do you mean? What do folks say about this? Certainly across brand or manufacturing, like, this is a real problem.
I think this is where, brands can be that extra differentiator, exactly like Anna Ray said, right? With the quality becoming really, really high for most of the teams, you need to understand internally, what are our COGS? How does that look? How do we squeeze out extra margin? And I think that means like a really internal audit on what we do well and what we don't do well. And I think you need to really understand your numbers, and then going on top, what is your separator? What is your USP? And how do you differentiate amongst your peers? Because if people are selecting based on price, it's going to be really difficult to see, okay, my brand is this. Well, why do you command that margin? And there has to be something special about it. And I think it's going to have to take a really tough look in the mirror and say, maybe we don't deserve that price. And if we're not operating underneath that, we got to figure out something else.
Yeah. I did a little AI research about this, which is bad, but I'll tell you what it said. I asked if the similar thing happened after alcohol prohibition, if there was like this massive price compression, and it wasn't immediate, but it did happen over time, and why. And we do have premiumization, certainly 100 years later, around alcohol, right? So it could be there's a wave. It's just how long that wave happens, what triggers it, and is it even possible within one state environment where people are producing and the competition is so fierce among where to actually buy it.
Like I'm not an economist, but like, I can see trends, right? And, in the cannabis industry, we spend so much time trying to control the economies through regulations, through coalitions, and I think we're fooling ourselves. Like, first, we see the same like cycle in every regulated state, and people always seem surprised when it happens to them. It's ridiculous. Like we have like 40 examples of like what is going to happen to you, and so it's like there's that, but like you can look at any market, and whether it's controlled or an open free market, it goes through these cycles where prices get compressed. People become uninterested in operating it because it's so compressed. And so if you're in coffee, you're drinking Folgers for decades. If you're in beer, you're drinking Budweiser for decades. If you're in chocolate, you're eating Hershey's for decades. And then people stop trying to enter until they want something premium. And so like, this is a little contrarian, but I think we're kind of fooling ourselves in cannabis to think that we're going to somehow organize and structure and avoid this. I think it's inevitable. Like, people are just going to want to stop competing, and that's when like a true free market starts to begin, right? And yeah, I don't know. I love premium cannabis products. I'm in the business of trying to create, both sides, commoditized and premium products. But it's not beyond me that like 98% of what we sell is like flavorless, like THC seltzers, right? Like, I love a live rosin infused like cola. Like, that's an amazing product, but it's not what's going to sell to the masses yet.
Yeah. Well, it's great. You're not an economist yet, Ben, but it sounds like you're well on your way to being there, or at least talking like one. But the only thing you didn't say was like, on the one hand and on the other hand, that is like what you learn in economics, just to say those two phrases in close comparison. But we actually released, or Lit Alerts released on our platform, the East Coast 8th Index this week, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. I'm going to take this down. And it almost is exactly sort of what you said, Ben, in that history does repeat itself. Massachusetts being the oldest market here, where their 8th is at 2389. The others are sort of bunched together between New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Maryland, all relatively the same age markets. But the trend line, I think, is going to head towards Massachusetts as we go. And this is the way it's repeated in almost every market that has launched. And I don't know how you stem it other than making your operations better or what? I don't know, Anna Ray?
Yeah, I will say, and this is an interesting chart because these top 4 markets, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and Maryland, have much less cultivation production per capita than Massachusetts. And when you say you don't know how you stem it, I think that the way that you stem it is by trying to stave off overproduction. And New York has a policy that they basically release or license cultivation based on their projections of what the market needs. Different from the states that have had the most extreme price compression, like California or Colorado, where there is no limit to the amount of cultivation licenses that the state will issue as long as you check the boxes that you are eligible for the license from a compliance perspective. So there is some element of hope or an opportunity to see what it's like in a market like New York. I think that we're going through a compression cycle right now that's almost just like a leveling, because operators are becoming more efficient as they learn their businesses better. But it's possible that New York won't go to Massachusetts because there just inherently is less production. And so it's possible that cultivators and producers might hold on to a little bit more power in the relationship, whereas in Massachusetts, they've lost all control.
Anna Ray, if you were advising a New York company, would you stress test them to try to evaluate how they could play it out, like a scenario in case that happened? Or you just say, hey, don't think this is a real scenario?
I think that the point is just to be the very best at what you do and to understand the fundamentals that drive your company. Like, getting too overly concerned of like, am I going to be like Massachusetts or Michigan? It's really about like, how are you going to be the very best that you possibly can? And if you understand your company, then you understand how low you can go and you understand what a healthy margin can be. So I think that's what's ultimately more important than trying to predict something that is unpredictable.
Can we shift gears again? This is me shifting gears. I'm going to downshift from third to second to try to slow down. And I chose second in particular because, Marc, you wrote this week, Hemp's Faustian bargain again. Talk about what you wrote, why you wrote it, and then we can have Ben counteract you.
Well, yeah, exactly. No, I enjoy that. This is why I love this conversation. Is look, I did not attend the beverage conference from 3 weeks ago, but I heard it a lot, from a lot of different people about the embrace it or fitting within the alcohol 3-tier system of distribution and sales as a way towards partnering with alcohol distributors and big retailers to get the support that the industry needs to get Congress across the finish line, which it makes. And I think I said, it may not be a bad idea. Maybe the deal that the industry has made, but the 3-tier system is, it's a beast, and it's it's an oligopoly. And it is, you ask any smaller mid-sized alcohol producer in this country, and it's the cause of everybody's problems. And so, it was more just a clarion call of this may still be a good idea, but when I hear everybody talking about it, it makes me think, well, wait a minute, do people really know what they're getting into? And so, so that's why it's sort of a Faustian bargain in my mind, which I realize is slightly intentionally trying to poke the bear a little bit, not bend the bear, just generally I'm trying to cause a little bit of ruckus. But, again, this is all out of love, because I want to see this all succeed. But, but it's just, it's eyes wide open. But
yeah. Ben and Anna Ray, you were at the conference. Are eyes wide open that this is careful what you wish for?
Anna Ray, why don't you go ahead and start?
Oh man. I think it doesn't, none of this matters. All that matters is what is realistic of a path forward. Mm-hmm. And something is better than nothing. So that's where I leave this is that incremental progress is better than nothing. We can build on it as a former student of prohibition, and again trying to learn about what happened with alcohol prohibition. We were reminded by a historian who was at that conference about the way that we came out of alcohol prohibition, which was very incremental in terms of what was allowed. And so if the 3-tier system is the place to go, then I think that will be an ultimate positive in terms of clarity. So
I think what I would add is that no one is designing for optimal right now. No one is trying to create a sustainable industry. We are trying to get a form of THC into the mainstream shelves, and depending on who you ask, the only acceptable version of that is a low dose beverage. And even the beverage, this is more, I wrote a long post about this. This is more restrictive than even beverage companies want, even what alcohol companies want. There's a lot of alcohol companies that don't like the 3-tier system, but they all agree that this is the only way we get this through, right? And here's the thing, to NRA's point, something or nothing. We could say we don't want 3-tier system, then we'll enjoy a mid-November shutdown. And it will come back through the 3-tier system because those oligopolies control everything. So do you want it now or not?
Yeah.
And even that, even if we all agreed, even if we got all of hemp to agree that they're not getting shit and they're only getting low dose beverage, even if they all got behind it, it would still be a coin flip as to whether there was continuity coming in November. And that's what people need to realize. I see so much banter online, and it's just baseless. It's people that spend 90% of their time on LinkedIn, not in DC, not talking to regulators, and I am tired of it. So that's my place. And also to the 3-tier system point, let me tell you what's happening without the 3-tier system. You have certain retailers in certain cities be like, oh, do you want to keep your products on the shelf till November? Pay me $10,000 right now. That doesn't happen in the 3-tier system because it can't.
Right.
Or else you get sued like Southern Glacier is right now.
Yeah, I was going to say you get indicted for bribery.
Yeah.
This is not the segue.
That is a very fair point. I this is why I appreciate your perspective on this.
Yeah, look, my general perspective is like all of us here would benefit from some form of THC being in the hands of people legally on store shelves.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I did not. This is not the segue that indicted for bribery brought me to. but Bryan, you had on the folks from LEEF this week. Give us a rundown. I swear it wasn't give us a rundown of the conversation, and we'll direct people to it afterwards in the show notes.
I'm always fascinated by the company that powers a lot of the brands. They're massive out in California, and they've kind of gotten pulled out to the East Coast by a lot of those brands. They're saying, hey, we need a reliable manufacturing partner. And I think it's an interesting way to expand. We've seen it a little differently with some of the MSOs. They're like, hey, we want to go out to this state. We're going to have to build up the infrastructure. Where here, LEEF kind of got pulled out by its customers, which I think kind of like de-risks that from their standpoint. Another aspect that I think is really fascinating about LEEF is the big farm that they are kind of growing into. It kind of gives them that protectionism that they didn't have, where if they don't have biomass, they can't extract. And that's kind of like a defense mechanism that they have now. They've got that lifeline in. They can help them set up some of their partners and help them expand out what they want to do in the future, give them a lot of optionality.
I saw a lot of heads nodding from Ben and NRA.
California guys.
Well, going back to our earlier discussion about price compression and lack of regulatory constraint on licensing, this is a 180-acre farm in Santa Barbara Mountains in California. That's massive, and price compression will continue, folks. That's the headline. Driven by LEEF and others. Once you start scaling to that level, it becomes very challenging. Like then you look at a county like Mendocino in the Emerald Triangle, and there's a 10,000 square foot cap on cultivation, and you wonder why the farmers in the Emerald Triangle are struggling. Just so people know, there's 44,000 square feet in an acre. So it's about a quarter of an acre that's allowed in Mendocino, and in Santa Barbara, they have 180 under cultivation. So it's inherently impossible to compete with that.
And I will add, it's they're smart, and they did what Glasshouse did, which was bringing the money. This latest round is preferred. 10% preferred, so they don't have to put it on their balance sheet or on their income statement as income statement as debt. They get to sort of like slot it in between, even though it's a 10% coupon. So they get to it doesn't look like that. So
I love the concept of a role player going multi-state, right? Like that's what we've done with our business. We operated across about 16 states last year, and if we can have people that just do what they do really well doing that, then that makes our job a lot easier. We get to rely on them. Same with labs, right? There's labs like, KSA that, operate across many different states. And it's like, what you're going to get when you work with them. So I think it's a maturation of the industry and people that can figure out how to do that with the state-by-state fragmentation. I like it. It's a good signal.
Good. We can end with people agreeing as opposed to yelling at each other. Mark, Ben. I'm just kidding. And then Mark and all the people who write the press releases. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Well, I appreciate all of your time today for this week in Cannabis Live. Bryan, thank you for joining the program. It's the first time, not the last time.
Thanks for having me.
And cool. Ben, Anna Ray, and Mark, also great to see you on this Friday. Have a good weekend, everybody. If anybody is in Toronto and wants to come to synagogue with me, there was a big synagogue day tomorrow because we're showing solidarity for obviously our Jewish community because we've been shot at this week, which is less than ideal. So we are all going to shul. If anybody wants to come, you guys are all welcome to join me tomorrow. If you can get here by 10 a.m. tomorrow, you can come with us to shul right after hockey, which is how we do it here in Canada. Shul starts after morning hockey. That's what we're gonna do.
It's a good way for play hockey on Shabbos. I like it.
Well, so my son plays on a team. His team plays on Shabbos, but there's two teams in the league that do not. So to schedule around those Friday and Saturdays that they do not play, and the Jewish holidays in the fall, those teams are very difficult to get with in the fall. But We do play them. The Avenue Road
like
Ducks.
Sandy Koufax. Yeah.
The Avenue Road Ducks and the JCC Warriors. I will just say that the Parkdale Flames beat them both 4 times this year. So that's all I'm going to say. It's not bragging.
Good plug. Good plug.
Thank you. Yes, there's exactly 20 people who care, and none of them watch the show. So, Anna Ray, Mark, Ben, and Brian, thanks so much for being here today. We will see everybody next Friday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific on This Week in Cannabis Live. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.